There's a moment, and I'm telling you, every single being who worked the lower corridors of Kelshrath Station knew this moment. There's a moment right before a new intake arrives in Sector 9 when the air changes. Not metaphorically, literally. The atmospheric processors on sublevel 12 would make this low, grinding sound, like a millstone turning somewhere deep in the guts of the station, and the humidity would drop about 4%, and the temperature, maintained at a precise 19.4 degrees Celsius per standard galactic regulation, would tick down to about 17.8. Nobody could ever explain why. The station's AI, Kelvara, ran diagnostics every time. Every single time the report came back, atmospheric variance within acceptable parameters. No mechanical fault detected. But the air still changed. And every being who worked those corridors, the maintenance staff, the intake coordinators, the academy guards in their polished silver and blue uniforms, every single one of them knew what that change meant. A human was coming. My name is Coordinator Velthris of the Fithari delegation. I have served the Galactic Interspecies Academy in an administrative capacity for 11 standard years. I have processed intakes from 47 recognized species. I have filed paperwork in triplicate on everything from the dietary restrictions of carnivorous Dravith cadets to the structural reinforcement requirements for amphibious Qualan students who needed submersion tanks in their dormitory rooms. I have never, not once, filed a form as strange, as complicated, or as quietly terrifying as a human intake form. And I want to be honest with you. I want to be completely transparent, because when this story eventually gets written into the official record, and I know it will, I've known it since the moment it ended, I want the record to be accurate. I was afraid of the human before I ever met one. Not because I had been told to be, not because the Academy's briefing documents use scary language. Actually, the opposite. The briefing documents were almost aggressively calm about it, measured, professional. Human cadets present unique physiological and psychological profiles that require specialized intake processing. Coordinators are advised to familiarize themselves with Appendix D14 through D31 before initial contact. That's it, that's what they gave us. Appendix D14 through D31. Do you know what's in those appendices? I'll tell you. Pages of medical data about bone density and muscle fiber composition. Pages about cortisol regulation and something called the fight-or-flight response, and why human adrenal glands are, quote, disproportionate to the species' apparent threat level. Pages about something called psychological resilience under extreme duress, which the appendix describes as the human capacity to experience catastrophic events, process them in real time, and continue functioning without biological shutdown. I read all of it twice, then I read it a third time. And then I went to my colleague Brekshan, big Dravith, scaled shoulders, 300 kilograms of solid apex predator biology, and I showed him the part about the adrenal glands. Brekshan read it, put the datapad down, looked at me with all four of his forward-facing eyes. They don't go into shock, he said. According to the document, they can go into shock, I said, but it's considered a malfunction, not a standard response. Brekshan was quiet for a long moment. Our species evolved next to something, he said slowly. Something that hunted us, something that shaped our biology for hundreds of thousands of years. What do you think was hunting them? I didn't have an answer. Neither, it seemed, did anyone else on staff. The intake was scheduled for the 14th of Cycle 749. I know that date by heart. I will probably know it for the rest of my life, which, given Fithari's standard lifespan, is a disturbingly long time. The human's name was Darian Mace. Just the two words. No species designation prefix, no clan suffix, no lineage marker. Just Darian Mace, rank, cadet, planet of origin, Earth, Sol system, age, 23 standard Earth years, which converts to approximately 19.6 galactic standard years. Young, by almost any measure, young. The preliminary medical file was enormous. Not because anything was wrong, it wasn't, but because the intake medical team had apparently run every test twice, because the first results seemed implausible. Bone density, 1.4 times galactic standard average for bipedal species at equivalent mass. Muscle fiber efficiency, 1.6 times galactic standard. Resting pain threshold, approximately 2.3 times the galactic median. Maximum sustained exertion before critical fatigue. The number was flagged for verification because it was higher than any recorded figure for a species of comparable size in the Academy's database. And then there was the note from Dr. Quinthala, the intake physician, which I saved because I've never forgotten it. Subject underwent full physiological assessment without sedation. Subject maintained conversation throughout, including during the bone density compression test, which typically causes involuntary vocalization in 7 of our 10 most common intake species. When asked if the subject was experiencing discomfort, subject replied, "A little, yeah. You want me to hold my breath or something?" Medical team required a recess. That last line, medical team required a recess. Not the human, the medical team. I wasn't at the intake bay when Darian Mace arrived. I was 3 levels up in the Administrative Processing Center handling paperwork. Standard practice, coordinators don't go to the bay for routine intakes. But intake supervisor M. Renqui sent me a message 40 minutes after the scheduled arrival time. "Velthris, when you have a moment, come to Bay 7. That's all it said, no explanation, no context. I'd worked with M. Renqui for 6 years. She was lethari, calm, precise, almost pathologically unflappable. I had seen her handle a Dravith cadet who arrived in partial battle rage without raising her voice. I had seen her process a Qualin intake during a station coolant leak, coordinating everything by hand while the automated systems were down. She had never once sent me a message that said, "When you have a moment," without telling me why. I put down my paperwork and went to Bay 7. Bay 7 is one of the standard intake bays. Nothing special about it. Smooth gray walls, blue lighting from the standard chromatic spectrum array, the standard bench seating along the perimeter, the standard processing desk in the center with its holographic display panel. The standard things were still there when I walked in. But the standard things were not what I noticed first. What I noticed first was that every member of the intake staff, the 6 beings, different species, all trained professionals with a collective 108 years of academy service between them, was standing against the far wall. Not sitting, standing, pressed against the wall like the wall had become a destination. And in the center of the room, sitting on the processing bench with his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands, looking at absolutely nothing in particular, was Darian Mace. He was, and I need to describe this carefully because description matters, he was not impressive looking. That's the thing. He was not what you would expect if someone told you this is the thing that terrified 6 trained intake professionals into pressing themselves against a wall. He was about 1.82 meters tall, average for a human I would later learn. Short hair, dark brown, slightly disheveled like he'd slept on it at an odd angle. Light brown skin with what I later learned humans call freckles across the nose and the tops of the cheeks. He was wearing the standard Academy intake uniform, gray, unadorned, functional, and it fit him like it fit everyone, adequately, without drama. He looked like a young being waiting for something mildly inconvenient to be over with. He looked completely, totally, utterly ordinary. And 6 trained professionals were pressed against the wall. M. Renqui crossed to me the moment she saw me come in. She moved carefully, unhurried, the way you move when you don't want to make any sudden sounds. "He sneezed," she whispered. I looked at her. I'm sorry. He was filling out his arrival forms. He sneezed. Twice quickly, the way his species does apparently. And Rickshaw, she glanced at one of the guards, a young Vethri male with his hand spine slightly raised. Rickshaw's threat response reflex activated, and he vaulted over the processing desk before he realized what had happened. And then everyone else responded to him reacting, and she gestured vaguely at the arrangement of 6 beings against the wall. I looked at Darian Mace. He had lifted his head slightly and was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Does he know? I said quietly. Oh yes, Imrenqui said. He asked us directly. I told him the truth. And he said, and I am quoting accurately, guys, it was a sneeze. I'm not going to hurt anyone. You want some water or something. You all look kind of pale. Well, you know what I mean. I stared at her. The you know what I mean was because he caught himself, she said. He knows not all species show physiological stress through pallor. He was being considerate. The being who had triggered a collective threat response in 6 trained professionals was sitting in the middle of the room offering to get them water. I took a slow breath, then I walked over. Up close he was still ordinary. That was the strangest part. Up close, when you could see his eyes dark brown, very still, the kind of still that isn't empty but is instead very, very full, he was still ordinary. Except for the eyes, maybe. The eyes were something. Your coordinator Velthris, he said, not standing, not changing his posture particularly, just looking at me. I am, I said. Welcome to Kelsherath Station, Cadet Mace. Darian, he said. Mace makes it sound like I'm in trouble. You're not in trouble. Good. He glanced at the 6 beings against the wall. Something moved across his face, not quite amusement, not quite concern, something in between. Are they going to be okay? Seriously, I didn't mean to freak anyone out. I get that the sneeze thing, he rubbed the back of his neck. Humans sneeze pretty aggressively. I know that. I should have warned them. You should not need to warn people, I said carefully, that you are going to sneeze. He made a small sound, something low and slightly rueful. I would learn later that it was a laugh, a particular kind of human laugh, the kind they make when something is funny but also a little embarrassing. Fair point, he said. Fair point. He looked around the room, took in the blue lighting, the gray walls, the holographic processing panels. His eyes moved with a kind of quiet, methodical attention, left to right, noting things, cataloging them. This is the academy, he said. It wasn't really a question. This is the intake bay, I said. The academy is. The big rotating structure I saw from the transport window, he said. Yeah, it's beautiful. He paused. I mean the space part, the stars. Another pause. I know that's probably a basic thing to say, but I'd never actually from space. I'd never actually seen them from space before, from outside atmosphere. He said it quietly, like he was telling me something private. This is your first time off planet, I said, checking his file even though I already knew the answer. Yeah, he looked at his hands for a moment. Yeah, it is. Something shifted in the room. I'm not sure how to describe it. The 6 beings against the wall had not moved, but something in the quality of the silence changed. Because he'd said it simply, without performance, without trying to make it more than it was or less than it was, just, yeah, it is. Like a being who was 23 years old and had traveled across the void between worlds for the first time and had found the stars beautiful, and was willing to say so, plainly, without armor on the words. I've processed hundreds of intakes. I had never had one start quite like that. Let's get your paperwork completed, I said. Sure, Darian said and sat up straighter, and gave me his full attention with those very still, very full eyes. The paperwork took 2 hours. Normally it takes 45 minutes. It took 2 hours because every third form had a field that didn't quite accommodate a human. Not because the form was badly designed. The Academy has been taking in species for 3 centuries. The forms are extremely well designed, but because human biology has corners and edges that don't quite fit the standard categories. Emergency medical contact, I said, reading from the screen. My mom, Darian said immediately. Elena Mace, Earth Sol system. She's got a code, I have it somewhere. He dug in his jacket pocket. Old habit, apparently the jacket was the academy intake uniform which didn't have personal storage pockets, but his hands went there anyway. He caught himself. Made that rueful sound again. Sorry, old habit. I had it saved. He touched the communication device on his wrist, found it, gave me the contact code. Next of kin beyond that. He thought for a moment. My brother Tors, he's Army. Small pause. He's stationed in the outer belt right now, the human fleet. He might be harder to reach. We'll list both, I said and typed. Is this the kind of form where you're asking because something might happen? Darian said, not alarmed, genuinely curious. It's standard procedure for all cadets, I said. Right, he nodded slowly. But the emergency contact that's for if I get hurt. It's a precaution. I'm just asking because, he paused, chose his words. I know this place is designed for a lot of different kinds of beings. I know some of them are. I've read some of the public files on the species enrolled here. I know the Dravith are. You've been studying the other enrolled species, I said. He looked slightly caught. Is that weird? It's not standard practice for incoming cadets, I said. I like to know what I'm walking into, he said simply. The matter-of-fact quality of it was, I'm not sure how to put this. It was not the answer of a being who was afraid. It was the answer of a being who had learned that information was a tool, and tools should be collected before you needed them, not after. You should know, I said carefully, that the Dravith cadets currently enrolled are aware of human intake. There was some discussion in the cadet cohort about, I checked my wording, about appropriate protocols for interspecies interaction. Darian watched me. They're nervous, he said. It wasn't a question. I wouldn't characterize it as. They're nervous, he said again, still not a question. His voice was mild, not triumphant, not amused exactly, just noting a fact. It's okay, I get it. I've read about Dravith. 300 kilograms apex predator biology. They basically look like someone scaled up a big cat and gave it tactical intelligence. He paused. And they're nervous about me. The instinctive response to an unknown apex category threat, I began. I'm not an apex category threat, he said. I'm 23 and I've never been in a real fight in my life. The most dangerous thing I did before this was probably eat my mom's cooking the time she misread a recipe and used a tablespoon instead of a teaspoon of pepper. He paused. That was a rough night. I stared at him. I'm joking, he said with a small, slightly tired smile. The fight thing, that's true, but I was also top of my combat assessment scores at the training facility, which I know sounds contradictory, but I think, he looked at his hands again, that habit of his, looking at his hands when he was thinking. I think the scores scared them more than the fighting would have. Does that make sense? It made a great deal of sense, more sense than I was entirely comfortable with. Let's continue with the forms, I said. He was assigned to Cohort 7, Mixed Species Cohort, which was standard for the Academy's integration philosophy. 14 cadets, 3 Dravith, 2 Lethari, 3 Vethri, 2 Qualin, 1 Tvelsha, 2 Rithani, and now 1 human. The Cohort 7 sleeping quarters were on Sublevel 8. I walked him there myself, which was not standard protocol. Mrenqui had suggested it quietly, and I had agreed, because the alternative was having him navigate the station alone on his first day. And I had a feeling, I couldn't say exactly why, that leaving Darian Mace to navigate unfamiliar territory alone was the kind of thing that would end with the station's emergency AI sending me a report I'd need to explain to the Academy board. Not because he'd hurt anyone, because he'd find something interesting and end up somewhere he wasn't supposed to be yet. We walked. The corridors of Sublevel 8 were wider than the upper levels, designed to accommodate the varied physical dimensions of the cadet population. Darian walked beside me and looked at everything, not obvious about it, not gawking, but his eyes moved, and they were always moving, and they missed nothing. We passed a trio of Vethri cadets coming the other way. They saw him, and one of them, at least, took a half step to the side before catching himself. The other two went very still for a fraction of a second, in the particular way prey-biology beings go still when something unexpected appears in their peripheral vision. Darian noticed. I watched him notice. He nodded at them, just a nod. Small, unceremonious, the way you'd greet someone in a hallway where you're both just trying to get somewhere. The Vethri cadets stared at him as he passed. "They know about me," he said after they'd gone. "Word travels," I said. "What did they hear?" I considered how to answer that. The official communication to the cohort was that a human cadet would be joining. And the unofficial communication. I was quiet for a moment. "Velthris," he said, not pressuring, just steady. "I'd rather know." "There was some discussion," I said carefully, "in the cadet common area, about whether the Academy's security protocols were adequate for." I stopped. "For me," he said. "For the integration," I said. He was quiet for about 4 steps. "The security protocols," he said then, in a perfectly level voice, "are designed to keep cadets safe from me." I didn't answer. He made that sound again, that rueful, tired sound that was and wasn't a laugh. "Okay," he said. "Okay. That's that's kind of something, but okay." "Cadet Mace." "Darian." "Darian?" I stopped walking. He stopped beside me, and I turned to face him, and I looked at him directly because I think he deserved directness, and I think he could handle it. "You have to understand, the species represented in your cohort have evolutionary histories that are very long. The threat response instincts that are activating in response to your presence are not," I searched for the word, "they are not rational. They are not based on anything you've done. They are based on what your species is." He looked at me, those still eyes. "What are we?" he said quietly. And I found in that moment that I didn't have a good answer, not one that fit in a hallway conversation, not one that was simple enough to say without spending an hour unpacking it. "Something the galaxy hasn't fully classified yet," I said. Darian Mace looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked away, down the corridor, toward where his dormitory room would be. And something moved across his face that I couldn't name, something that was complicated and layered in the way that I would learn his expressions often were. "That's either really reassuring or really not," he said. "Yes," I said. "Which one?" "I'm not sure yet." He nodded, slowly, like he was filing that answer somewhere for later use. We kept walking. The first week of Cohort 7's integration cycle was, by every official metric, normal. I know because I read the reports. Every morning, 07:00 station time, the cohort supervisor, senior instructor Threnval, a veteran Lethari with 22 years in academy education, submitted a daily integration summary to the administrative office. I read every one. I read them the way you read something you know is going to tell you something you're not quite ready to hear, carefully, looking for the spaces between what's written. Day 1 summary, cohort integration proceeding nominally. Cadet Mace completed orientation sequence without incident. Cohort dynamics require monitoring. Requires monitoring. That's the phrase. Professional language for something is happening that I'm watching very carefully but don't yet know how to describe. Day 2, academic performance metrics tracking normally across cohort. Cadet Mace completed physical assessment battery. Results have been flagged for review by the medical department as the automated assessment system returned several error codes, apparently due to out-of-range readings. Out-of-range readings. Because the assessment system, calibrated across 47 species, had never processed a human before, and kept returning error codes when his results exceeded the expected parameters. Not by a little, not by a margin that could be dismissed as measurement variance. By a lot. The physical assessment battery was a standardized test. Every cadet took it. It measured things like reaction time, sustained force output, cardiovascular efficiency, pain tolerance during resistance testing, all calibrated to produce comparable results across species. The scoring was normalized so that a 500-kilogram Dravith and a 90-kilogram Vethri would be scored on the same curve relative to their species' expected performance baseline. Darian Mace's results weren't just high for a human, they were high on the raw scale. The unnormalized, non-species adjusted, absolute raw number scale. Dr. Quinthala sent me the flagged results personally with a note that said, "Velthris, I need you to look at these. I have run the assessment twice. I have recalibrated the equipment. The numbers are the same. Please advise." I looked at them. His reaction time, measured in standard milliseconds, was 94. The galactic average for bipedal species, normalized, is 180. 94 milliseconds, raw, unfiltered, no species adjustment. "That's not possible," I said, out loud in my empty office to no one. But it was in the report, twice, because Dr. Quinthala had run the assessment twice, and both times the number was the same. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for quite a long time. Day 3's summary had a new element, cohort dynamic incident at 1432. No injuries, no property damage, medical team not required, full incident report attached. I opened the attached incident report. At 1432, Cadet Mace had been using one of the shared physical training spaces, solo, during open training hours, running what the incident report described as an unstructured conditioning session. His language, apparently, unstructured. No program, no set exercises, just moving. 3 Dravith cadets had come to use the same space. Standard practice, open training hours, multiple cadets use the same facility. Normal. The Dravith cadets had stopped in the doorway when they saw him. Cadet Mace had been doing what the incident report's attached footage, I watched it 4 times, can only be described as something that, if you saw it without context, you would think was some kind of trained combat sequence. Not because he was fighting. Because the way he moved had that quality, controlled, precise, like someone who has thought very carefully about where every part of their body is at all times and why. He was just conditioning, running through movements, but the movements were. There's a word in Lethari that doesn't translate cleanly into galactic standard. Velsha. It means something like, the particular terrible grace of a thing that is more capable than it appears to be. That's what the footage showed. The 3 Dravith cadets had stood in the doorway for 47 seconds. The timestamp on the footage makes it exact before Cadet Mace noticed them. When he noticed them, he stopped and turned and said, "Hey, you here to use the space? I can move." The Dravith cadets had, according to the incident report, retreated down the corridor without speaking. The incident report noted, carefully, that the Dravith cadets in question had a collective mass of approximately 840 kilograms, were each roughly 2.1 to 2.3 meters in height, and had evolutionary backgrounds that classified their species as apex-level territorial predators who had never, in the entire recorded history of their contact with other species, voluntarily retreated from a shared space. They retreated from Darian Mace. He was sitting in the training space for another 20 minutes after they left, according to the footage, doing absolutely nothing that should have been threatening. He did some stretching. He drank from his water container. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling. At one point, he appeared to be quietly singing something to himself, just under the recording's audio threshold. The incident report concluded with Instructor Threnval's note. The cadet did not behave in any overtly aggressive or provocative manner. The cohort dynamic effect appears to be occurring independent of the human's actions. I am not sure how to categorize this for the standard incident form. I have filed it under environmental adaptation variance for now. Environmental adaptation variance. Because there was no box that said, the human sat in a room and 3 apex predators left, and nobody touched anyone, and we still have no idea what actually happened. I went to see Instructor Threnval on day 4. Her office was on sub-level 6, small and tidy in the way that Lethari living and working spaces tend to be. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary, the aesthetic of a mind that processes information by organizing the physical world around it. She was standing when I came in, not sitting, which told me she was still processing something. Lethari stand when they're thinking hard. The Dravith filed a formal request, she said, before I'd fully entered the room. A request for what? Alternative cohort placement. She turned from the window, which looked out on the station's inner ring, the slow rotation of the Academy's main structure visible beyond the glass. All 3 of them, filed separately within an hour of each other. They're requesting transfer to a cohort without, she paused, without the human cadet. I sat down without being invited. What grounds did they cite? The form they used is the psychological comfort variance form, Threnval said. It's designed for situations where a cadet's well-being is significantly impacted by the cohort dynamic. It's used when, for example, a cadet with prey-response biology is placed in close quarters with multiple high predator rating species. She paused again. The Dravith are using it to argue that they are experiencing prey-response stress. The silence in the room was very specific. They are apex predators, I said. By every biological metric we have, she agreed. And they're filing psychological discomfort forms because of one 23-year-old human. Yes. I thought about the training footage. The 47 seconds of 3 840-kilogram apex predators standing in a doorway. The retreat down the corridor. What are we going to do with the request? I asked. Threnval finally sat down. She looked tired. The honest answer, I don't know. The forms are valid. The process has to be followed. But if I approve cohort transfers because, she spread her hands, because 3 Dravith are afraid of sharing a dining space with a human, then I've set a precedent. I've said that the human's presence is, in itself, a disruption that justifies accommodation. And that sets us up for every other species in the cohort filing similar requests, I said. If they don't file them first, she looked at me, how is the cadet himself? He seems, I thought about our corridor conversation, the way he'd said yeah, it is when I asked if it was his first time off planet, the way he'd looked at his hands when he was thinking. He seems fine, I said, which might be its own problem. Explain. He's not performing adjustment, I said. Most cadets in a new environment, new species, new sounds, new sensory experiences, there's an adjustment period, observable, a kind of newness to how they move and respond. He doesn't have that. He walked into the intake bay and he sat down, and he started looking at the walls and the lights, and the other beings the way you'd look at a new route you're planning to drive, carefully, gathering information, noting everything. Threnval was quiet. He's not adjusting, I said. He's already adjusted. He arrived adjusted. Or, Threnval said slowly, he arrived as himself. And himself is something that doesn't require adjustment to new threats, because the category, new threat, is one that he processes the same way regardless of what the specific threat is. I sat with that. What kind of world, I said finally, produces something like that? Threnval looked out the window at the slow rotation of the Academy. A hard one, she said. A very hard one, I would imagine. I went to see Darian on day 5, not as his coordinator, just to see him. He was in the common room on sub-level 8, alone. Most of the cohort was in afternoon elective sessions. He had a free period, according to his schedule, and he'd apparently decided to spend it the way humans apparently spend idle time, reading something on his personal device, and occasionally looking up at nothing in particular with that look that I was starting to recognize as him turning something over in his head. "Hey," he said when I came in. "How are you settling in?" I said, sitting across from him. Not the coordinator question, or not only that, a real question. He thought about it, actual thought, not the automatic response kind. "It's strange," he said finally, "but not in a bad way. Just strange." "What's strange about it?" "Everyone moves around me," he said. "Like you know how water moves around a rock. In a current, the water has to go around the thing that isn't moving. It's like that. I walk down a corridor and there's this shift, like everyone recalibrates." "Does it bother you?" He looked at his hands, that habit. "It's lonely," he said quietly. "Which is the thing I wasn't expecting. He paused. I expected it to be hard here because of the language stuff or the culture stuff, or because the food wouldn't be right, or because I'd be the different one, the outlier, the one who had to work twice as hard to." Another pause. "But it's none of those things, it's just, everyone moves around me. Like I'm a current disruption." "The Dravath filed transfer requests," I said, because he deserved to know, and because I'd been right earlier, he could handle it. He didn't flinch. "I figured," he said. "I saw them watching me in the training space yesterday, that specific kind of watching." He paused. "It's weird, right, that they're the ones moving away." "Is it?" "Velthris," he looked at me directly, those full, still eyes. "A Dravath could take me apart with one claw, any one of the three could, without trying, without even they could, and they're the ones filing the transfer forms." "You've studied them," I said. "I studied everything I could find," he said, "before I came. Their biology, their social structure, their history. I wanted to understand who I'd be living with." He looked away. I wanted to make sure I didn't do anything that. He stopped himself. "That what?" I said. "That scared them," he said, very quietly. "I didn't want to scare anyone. I know how this goes. I've read about first contact situations, about interspecies integration, about the history of species trying to live together when their biologies are, when the gap is big. It usually goes bad. I didn't want to be the reason it went bad." I stared at him. "You came here worried about scaring them," I said. "I came here worried about everything," he said, with that same quiet straightforwardness. "I was terrified the whole flight over, properly terrified. I had 3 panic attacks in the transport cabin." Small pause, mild ones. "I have this thing I do with my breathing, it helps." Another pause. "I didn't want anyone to see." The being who had triggered threat response in 6 trained intake professionals by sneezing. The being whose raw reaction time was 94 milliseconds. The being whose presence alone had caused 3 Dravath apex predators to retreat down a corridor. He'd had 3 panic attacks on the transport ship, mild ones. He'd managed them alone with a breathing technique because he didn't want anyone to see. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Why did you come?" I said. "To the academy. You could have stayed on Earth, the human fleet training." "Because this is where things happen," he said, "simple as that. This is where the galaxy is happening, right out here. And if I'm not out here, if humans aren't out here, learning and messing up and figuring it out alongside everyone else," he spread his hands, "then we're just waiting for whatever the galaxy decides to do to us, and I'd rather be here." I sat with that for a long time. "The Dravath transfers," I said, "they'll be denied." He looked at me. "They'll be denied," I said again. "Not because the forms weren't valid, but because denying you a full cohort integration because other cadets are experiencing instinctive discomfort would be wrong, and Instructor Threnval knows it." Darian was quiet. Something moved across his face again, that complicated layered thing. They're going to hate that, he said. Probably, I agreed. And then they're going to be in a cohort with me, and they're going to hate that. Also probably. He looked at his hands, then he looked up, and he did something that I had to record that I have tried to describe accurately because I know how strange it sounds. He smiled, a real smile, not a performance, not a social function, something genuine and warm and a little sad all at once. Okay, he said, then I'll just have to figure out how to not be scary, which, look, that's not exactly new territory for me. I've been the weird one in the room before. On Earth. Everywhere, he said simply. Everywhere I've ever been. And I thought, sitting in that quiet common room with the slow rotation of the academy visible through the porthole window, and the blue lighting making everything look like it was underwater. You have no idea how that defines you. The Dravath transfers were denied on day 6. Threnval sent the notification to the 3 cadets personally. She told me later she'd done it in individual meetings because she wanted to be able to explain the reasoning face to face, to give them the chance to voice concerns in a formal setting rather than processing denial alone. The meetings did not go well. Not violently, I want to be clear about that. Nobody was hurt, no regulations were broken, but the meetings did not go well. The senior of the 3 Dravath cadets, a male named Vekthar, who stood 2.3 meters and had the kind of physical presence that made rooms feel smaller without him doing anything in particular. Vekthar listened to Threnval's explanation with absolute, stone-faced composure, and then said, quietly, "With respect, instructor, you are asking us to share living space with a Death Worlder." Threnval, according to her own account, had been ready for this. All species in the cohort present potential interaction risk, she said. Your own species is rated. I know what we are rated, Vekthar said. I also know what we have seen, what my scales have told me since the moment he arrived. He stopped. There was a very specific pause, then, there is a sensation. When a Dravath encounters another apex predator, a biological recognition, we have a word for it. He said the word, it was in Dravath, I'm transliterating, Kethful. It means the awareness of something that could kill you, even though you are you. Threnval was quiet. We feel this with nothing, Vekthar said. We have felt it with no species in the Academy's register. We have never felt it in the wild, in our home territory, with the largest predators on our world. Another pause. We feel it with the human, he said. When Threnval told me this, I sat in her office for a while without saying anything. What did you say to him? I finally asked. I said that I understood and that I would ensure regular check-in sessions were available and that the cohort integration would be monitored closely, she said. And then I asked him, does Cadet Mace know? Does he know that you feel this? Vekthar had thought about it. I don't think he does, he'd said finally. He doesn't move like a predator. He moves like, another pause, choosing words carefully, like something that was once prey, that learned. Threnval looked at me across her desk. Like something that was once prey, I said slowly, that learned. That learned, she repeated. We sat with that in the quiet of her office for a very long time. Day 8. Something unexpected happened on day 8. Something that nobody had predicted, not Threnval, not me, not the Academy's integration assessment AI, not, I suspect, even Darien himself. On day 8, one of the Quallen cadets, a young female named Telqua, small even by Quallen standards, with the translucent blue-green tinting that indicates youth in her species, came to the common room at roughly 06:00 before most of the cohort was awake. She did this because, according to the statement she gave Threnval afterward, she'd had what she described as a sleep disruption episode. Quallen are intensely sensitive to atmospheric changes, and something in the night cycle's air processing had woken her and left her feeling disoriented in the specific way that Quallen experience disorientation. not confused, but temporarily unable to process spatial information correctly. She came to the common room because it was the closest open space, and she needed space, and she sat on one of the benches with her knees drawn up, and her chromatophores cycling in the slow, anxious pattern of a Quallen who is trying to regulate. And Darian was already there. He was doing that thing he apparently did in the early hours, sitting with his back to the wall, reading something on his device, a cup of some hot liquid he'd figured out how to get from the dispensary. He'd apparently been waking at 0400 or 0500 most days. Threnval's report noted it. Humans, apparently, don't always sleep in one continuous block. Some of them wake in the middle of the night and do things, read, think, sit quietly, and then sleep again. Darian looked up when Telqua came in. He watched her for a moment, reading the chromatophore pattern. He'd clearly done his reading on Quallen biology because he understood what the color cycling meant. He didn't say anything immediately. He watched her sit down and breathe and cycle, and then, slowly, so she could track the movement, not making any sudden gestures, he set his device aside and he said quietly, "Can I sit closer? I don't have to, but sometimes it helps to have someone near." She'd looked at him. According to her statement, she'd been surprised. Not because a Quallen typically reads surprise differently than fear. Their chromatic responses are species-specific. But because she'd been expecting to be alone, and also because she'd been aware of his reputation in the cohort. "Why?" she'd said. "Because I've had those episodes," he said. "What you're having right now, I know what it looks like." Simple pause, "You don't need to talk. I'll just be here." She'd said, "You have those." "Yeah," he said. "It's different for me, my species, the biology is different. But the being up at 4 in the morning and not being okay thing, yeah, I know that one." Her chromatophores had stilled. She'd said, "You're afraid of things." And Darian Mace, the being whose raw reaction time was 94 milliseconds, whose bone density tested 1.4 times the galactic average, whose presence alone caused apex predators to involuntarily retreat. Darian Mace had looked at her with those full, still eyes and said, "I'm afraid of lots of things, the dark when it's really dark, making the wrong choice when someone needs me to make the right one, not being enough." A pause. "Sneezing at the wrong moment apparently causes interstellar incidents, which is a new one." A smaller pause. "I was terrified the whole way here. I still am, kind of." Telqua had looked at him for a long time. Then she'd moved 2 spots down the bench. Not to him. 2 spots closer to where he was. He'd picked his device back up. She'd sat there. Neither of them said anything else. She stayed until the morning cycle started. When she got up to leave, she said, "Thank you, Cadet Mace." "Darian," he said, not looking up. "Thank you, Darian," she said. That was it. That was the whole exchange. But Threnval told me about it because Telqua told Threnval, and Threnval told me because she understood, even then, before everything that came later, she understood that it mattered. That something had turned, in that early morning quiet, in a way that wasn't visible in any report metric, but was as real as anything the assessment battery could measure. The cohort had made its first contact. Not through programming, not through integration curriculum, not through the carefully structured cross-species interaction modules the Academy had developed over 3 centuries. Through a 23-year-old human with a breathing technique for panic attacks, sitting at 0400 in the morning saying, "I know that one. I'll just be here." The incident that everyone eventually called the test, not because anyone official named it that, but because that's what it became in the station's informal history, the kind of story that gets told and retold until the name just settles on it. The test happened on day 14. 2 weeks into the integration cycle. I wasn't there. I need to say that clearly because everything I'm about to tell you comes from the reports, the camera footage, and the accounts of the people who were there, all of which are consistent, all of which, when I put them together, give me the same picture. On day 14, Cohort 7 was in the Academy's main simulation facility for their first full tactical scenario drill. The simulation facility was on Sublevel 4. Large space. The floor could be reconfigured into almost any terrain type, and the environmental systems could produce a wide range of atmospheric, lighting, and acoustic conditions. The drills were standard Academy training. The cohort would be placed in a simulated crisis scenario and evaluated on decision-making, interspecies cooperation, and individual tactical performance. It was not supposed to be a difficult drill. First drill of the integration cycle, calibrated for orientation rather than stress. Threnval had designed it herself. The scenario: a survey mission gone wrong. The cohort arrives at a site to find the team they're meant to relieve has encountered an unexpected aggressive fauna population. The fauna is dangerous but not lethal at full cohort capability. Objective: secure the site, protect a simulated civilian population of 6, extract safely. Standard: designed for a passing grade. Designed to build confidence and identify cohort communication patterns. What happened instead was not what anyone designed. The simulation started normally. The cohort entered the configured terrain. The fauna, physical simulation drones, large, programmed with predatory behavior patterns, began appearing at the scenario's designated triggers. For about 8 minutes, it went normally. Then something in the scenario generation system, a software fault that engineering spent 3 days trying to reproduce and never fully could, escalated the simulation's difficulty to level 7, the maximum level. A level designed for 4th-year cadets, not first-week integrations. The drones multiplied. The terrain reconfigured. The lighting dropped to near-zero visibility conditions. The audio system began generating the sounds that the simulation library categorized as maximum stress environmental, deep-frequency vibrations, high-pitched intermittent alerts. The specific sonic profile the system's designers had determined produced the most acute stress response across the widest range of species biologies. And the simulation's civilian protection protocol changed. The 6 simulated civilians, spread across the terrain, were now in direct threat contact. 14 cadets in the dark and the noise, against a scenario designed for 4th years.